So today we'll be speaking about gluten and glyphosates. And I chose this as the really like the second large topic to cover because there's a lot of misconception about it. And as much research as I do, it's really an emerging field. There is no direct and specific link between, I'm just going to be honest and say there's no direct and specific link between eating gluten or glyphosates and eczema, but there is a tremendous amount of emerging evidence that shows that large amounts of gluten for many kids and a large amount of glyphosates for kids and adults cause problems with gut health. And if you want to reverse your child's eczema, you have to start with gut health first. And this lesson today is going to explain why. So let's just go over what gluten and glyphosates are, and they're two different things. I think that gluten and glyphosates, mono gluten, is actually one of the reasons why in 2011 the CDC said, and this is like a staggering number, 54% of kids in the US have a chronic disorder or disease by age 17. So what does that mean exactly? When I was doing research for this, I'm actually writing a book on all this, and I'm doing evidence-based approach to all this, doing research, and I was trying to understand what is meant by chronic disease. There's no one definition of that. So for those of you listening live and listening afterwards, I want you to ask yourself if your child actually has a chronic problem or it's something that comes and goes and it's not really chronic. So by my definition of chronic, and by many definitions out there, I would say that chronic is something that lasts for more than 3 months in a child. It doesn't go away on its own. And if you do treat it with something like symptom manager or Band-Aid solution, like a steroid or an immunomodulator, it will come back and it's interfering with your child's life. So that's the short version of that. And if you're looking for like a longer version, there's a whole section on what is meant by chronic illness in the Eczema Rescue Program, where I speak about the epidemic of chronic childhood illness and how staggering it is. And so 54% of kids in the US have a chronic disorder by age 17 right now. And that number is actually going up and up and up. And one of the biggest problems is eczema and allergies. How many of you listening had, when you were a child in elementary school, middle school, even high school, that had any friends or had anyone in your classroom that had an anaphylactic food allergy and had to walk around with an EpiPen? Like, I have been asking this question all the time, everywhere I go, every lecture I do, not every, but it's really just mind-blowing, because it's about 2 to 3 kids in an average size classroom of 30 kids that will have to have an EpiPen on standby because they have an anaphylactic food allergy. And so we went from no one really had a peanut allergy. What do you mean by we can't bring nuts to school? Why all these kids have to walk around with EpiPens everywhere they go? Because they can have life-threatening reactions to seemingly normal things. So we have a bit of a problem, and the problem is because it's not just one thing, it's a combination of things. And so when we look at reversing eczema, we take many different approaches. So the one that we're doing here in this program is basically removing the things in our child's environment that we can't control for, that is not necessary, that is causing too much inflammation, removing that so that if there is something coming into their system, they're able to detox it, process it. It's not going to throw them into an overdrive. And that's where you have eczema. Eczema is not a problem of the skin. It's not an issue with the skin barrier. It's a problem from the inside out. It's too much inflammation. And so if you want to heal, you need to first remove all the things that are not serving our kids. And some things we can control for, and others we cannot. So that's why the whole first section of the Eczema Rescue Program is all about removing the things in a child's environment that is not serving them. We spoke about dairy a couple of weeks ago. There is a section on sugar, and we'll cover more of that later. I mean, that's pretty obvious, but what is not so obvious is gluten and glyphosates and their impact on gut health, because the first place to start healing from eczema and allergies is truly the gut. And that's because so much immune dysregulation and development happens in the gut. So, so let's talk about why it's gluten. By the way, gluten, if you're like, what is gluten? There's nothing wrong with gluten itself, okay? In the way that it was created hundreds of years ago and grown hundreds of years ago, there is nothing wrong with wheat. It's not a bad thing, but the way that it's processed and grown, especially in the US, is a big problem. So if you recall a few weeks ago when we spoke about dairy, and I mentioned like dairy itself is not the problem at all. It could be a very healing food. But when we speak about dairy doing a body good, dairy being good for strong bones, dairy being a great source of calcium and vitamin D, yes, this is all true if it's not conventional dairy, which is just hormones, chemicals, and garbage that is not serving our kids. So same thing with gluten, wheat. Wheat is most likely associated with gluten, and that's not the problem in itself. It's just a starchy protein binder, and it occurs in some grains. Wheat is one of them. There is, it's not even that the modern wheat is a modern kind of agriculture. You could have other kinds of plants growing food with gluten in it. I just want to speak to you a little bit about what an ancient grain is and what a modern wheat is. So ancient grains are grains that have been like planted and cultivated the same exact way for hopefully for thousands and thousands of years, with very little or no manipulation from modern man. So you could have a really great ancient grain like quinoa, it doesn't have gluten. You could have an ancient grain like spelt, which it does have gluten, but it's still pretty healthy because it hasn't been manipulated by the things that I'm going to talk about that actually that are the reason why gluten is so dangerous for a lot of kids. So in ancient grains versus to modern wheat, which we find in our average grocery stores, is that most grains today, modern grains, come from a variety of wheat that was created in the 1960s through, it's GMO, it was crossbred, it was genetically manipulated. And when you have wheat that is planted as a monocrop, which depletes the soil, and so the actual plant itself is not a healthy one. When you have wheat that is grown in with shallow roots in a soil that doesn't have a lot of biodiversity, meaning there's really no life in that soil, there are no worms, there's no probiotics, there's no natural nitrogen, it's just chemicals that are given into that plant to grow it. Sometimes plants, by the way, are grown hydroponically and there's no soil or sun involved at all, and you just have a solution of chemicals that are food for this plant to grow. And so there's no life in that plant, even though it might be beautiful. It doesn't have the same nutrient value as something synthetic. When you have wheat that is, or grains that are modern, that are sprayed and sprayed and sprayed with glyphosates, which are basically herbicides, commonly like Roundup, for example. When you have grains that are milled and very highly processed, you have to then genetically tamper it, bleach it, and then you strip it, then you process it some more, and then what you get is a very unnatural product. And the farther away you walk away from nature, when you have to do all these manipulations to yield large amounts of crops, to feed all these people, for these companies to make a lot of money, what you get is a food that is not necessarily a healthy food. And the bigger issue, the biggest one of all, besides like monocrop planting and the soil, it doesn't have any biodiversity, and all the post growth, like when they actually have to bleach it to make it white bread, etc., strip it of all its healthy components to process it. The biggest problem is really glyphosates. So what glyphosates are, I'll tell you a little story about glyphosates. And glyphosates are used by the billions of pounds each year. These are herbicides that are sprayed onto soils and plants, and then because of this, they end up in the food for us, in the food for our livestock, also in our groundwater. And so Monsanto was one of the first companies that created this crop of wheat that was Roundup ready. It was created so that you can grow a lot of wheat and other grains that use this kind of herbicide without needing to do a lot of manual labor to basically try to get rid of the weeds and all the other life forms that grow in it. But glyphosates are a big problem for kids who might have a problem with their gut health, who have a lot of inflammation. Actually, I read a study recently where they've taken like a slice of pizza, and just a regular slice of pizza, and just with the regular wheat that was used, and you could actually measure the amount of glyphosate in that pizza in a really significant way. I know that it probably means nothing, but it was 10 parts per million, which is it was basically like going outside, spraying the lawn, and then having your child lick it. That's how I looked at it, in a slice of pizza. So there's not much control over these things, internationally as well. So so we have all this spraying of glyphosates, and especially in Roundup ready and glyphosate ready crops. So it's not just wheat, but it's also corn and soybeans, canola, alfalfa, have a ton of glyphosates in them. So why is it bad for kids who have inflammation? Glyphosate stimulates something called zonulin in the gut. And there is a ton of research that shows that glyphosates damage the epithelial tight junctions when they contact them. So what that means is you have a gut lining from mouth to anus, and the whole entire gut lining is basically one cell layer thick. It's called the endothelial lining. And you have two different cells connected, right? Like imagine this is a cell and this is a cell. Normal healthy gut lining, it's connected really tightly. Everything that goes into the body, into the bloodstream right beneath it, into the gullet, which is the lymphatic tissue, right behind it, has to go through the actual cell. There are tight junctions that keep it nice and tight, so nothing gets through the cells, because if it's going through the cell, it's going to be selective. If it's going through the cell, it's only absorbing the things in your child's environment that needs to be absorbed. If it's going through the tight junction that has been disturbed and it's not tightly bound anymore, what happens is your child is having environmental exposures, grass, trees, pollen, foods that they eat, right? Things that they inhale going into the bloodstream as large molecules. And when large molecules enter a child's body or anyone's body, the immune system does exactly what it's supposed to be doing, which is attacking it as foreign. And that's why all the allergies. And I think like most of you will have kids who not only have eczema, but allergies as well. And maybe allergies are suspected, sensitivities are suspected. And so this is why we need to address these tight junctions, because if you continue to add glyphosates to these tight junctions that weaken this barrier, you're going to have your child exposed to a barrage of environmental toxins. And then so it's basically called a leaky gut. And this is what we're trying to heal and restore, and whatever you want to call it, is what we're trying to do in the next few weeks. Or if you are already past that level, if you've already done it when you did the stocks in the broth, that's to heal and seal the gut lining, those tight junctions, replenish the microbiome with ferments. That's how we make sure that it's basically like the rainforest of all the microbes that live in the gut are nice and healthy and err on the side of the healthy ones versus not healthy ones. When you have a collapse of these tight junction walls in the gut, the same exact thing happens in the blood-brain barrier. So there's tight junction barrier between the brain and the rest of the body. And those glyphosates also significantly affect those tight junctions. And so this is why there's such a correlation between gut health and brain health and psychological health for kids and adults. It's an emerging field, but I am 100% confident that exposure to glyphosates especially, and possibly even gluten for many kids could be very inflammatory because it's disturbing tight junctions. Gliadin proteins that are the proteins found in gluten also release zonulin, which breaks down those tight junctions. So again, when you have those intestinal tight junctions disturbed, the unwanted large proteins get into the bloodstream, get into the brain, and then you have immune activation. And for our kids who have eczema, the immune system is already overactivated. There's already so much inflammation. It's the same exact inflammatory compound cascade that you're trying to prevent and heal. And without removing all these offending agents first, you can't really do any healing. So this is why I really encourage you to consider removing gluten and other versions of especially gluten, because glyphosate is very heavy in wheat, but also things like corn, soybeans, and canola from your child's diet, unless it's organic, which is actually very hard to find these days, high quality. So I'm speaking about like GMO crops. Corn, soybean, and wheat have a ton of glyphosates. So if you're doing this, you want to make sure that you also try to read your labels. There are tons of hidden glutens everywhere. Right now, we have kind of a big push that says everywhere it says gluten-free, gluten-free, if something is gluten-free. But you have to be really careful, because you don't want to replace gluten-free products with other chemicals. And this is probably the biggest mistake that parents make, is they want to get the healthier version of something. But if you look in the back of a label and you try to get a gluten-free bread, not always, but very often, you'll have tons of binders, fillers, emulsifiers, extra sugars, preservatives, vegetable oils, soy products especially. Soy is a very, very cheap, versatile product, and that could be turned into like flours and thickeners and binders. So a lot of these gluten-free products are not necessarily what you want your child to have. They'll have a lot of trans fats, which are very inflammatory, lots of artificial salts, some vegetable oils, which I don't recommend. They're very unstable. They're also very inflammatory. So don't try to remove gluten and replace it with gluten-free products unless it's very clean. Read your labels or make it yourself. If you're removing gluten, read your labels. A lot of, there's now more and more pastas, for example, that are gluten-free. They might be made of like rice, but my favorite is actually chickpea. Like banza is my favorite to replace it with. There are a ton of different kinds of rice ramens that are available for kids if you're looking for that kind of pasta. Baked goods, you could easily replace wheat when you're baking with things like buckwheat flour, oat flour. And so look for hidden ingredients all over the place when you're trying to remove gluten and glyphosates. How long to remove it? That's a good question. So unless your child has celiac disease, which is not as common, it's possible. Celiac disease is an actual antibody response to gluten. It's rising as well, but just because you don't have those types of antibodies, and we're discovering antibodies to gluten all the time that are not tested, just because you're not seeing those specific antibodies and your child is not diagnosed with celiac disease doesn't mean they're not sensitive to it. You have to actually remove gluten for about at least 3 to 4 weeks to see improvement. And you know what? It's not forever. The goal is to go through a program like this, to calm the inflammation. We're going to bring back the things in your child's environment that is allowing them to heal and seal the gut lining, let them get better, and then you could start to bring things back like gluten in moderation. And the goal is not to have restrictions forever. The goal is to be able to tolerate all these things in moderation, right? Without having to be a problem for your child's gut health. I see there's some questions that I want to answer. So Vamshi asked, is millet an ancient grain? In India, it's considered an ancient grain. I'm glad you asked. So I kept going back and forth on millet. And yeah, I kept going back and forth on millet because there was some anecdotal evidence that showed that it could exacerbate eczema for some kids. But recently I took it off the do not, it's a flour that is allowed. It's not going to be a problem for kids with eczema. There was no evidence behind it that was substantial. It was a really small study. So you might see that in some elimination diets where millet is removed, but for the sake of this program, millet is considered an ancient grain and is allowed as an ancient grain.
So we can give hi ma'am. So we can give millets to the kids, right?
Sorry?
So we can give millets to the kids.
Yes, 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 yes.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. And then there was a great question. Let's see, what does it mean? So Nitin asked, what does that mean? Organic wheat, okay or no, and it must be eliminated. So for the sake of this program, if you want to do like a deep healing protocol, I would suggest eliminating wheat completely and all gluten completely for about a month, and then you could bring it back if your child is improving, or if your child is doing great, what's the point of rushing to bring it back? In general, organic wheat is okay in moderation. I would say it's probably in moderation because even organic is a very, especially in the US, is a very processed wheat. There's so much evidence that shows that the wheat that is grown in other countries is completely different than the one here. So much, I mean, I know it's kind of anecdotal, but many people who can't tolerate any kind of gluten products here can go to a different country, like Italy especially has really good grains, and have all the pasta and all the bread and not have any reaction from it. And that's because of all the processes, the chemical processes that happen when you grow wheat. So I suggest minimizing wheat. And for the sake of this program, eliminating completely for about 4 weeks. Margaret asked, do you ever find children with eczema show antibodies to gluten due to their persistent inflammation, but not so much for true celiac? So Margaret, it's kind of impossible to, it's a good question. If you do have antibodies to, if you have a child or an adult who has antibodies to gluten, it's considered celiac disease, and no one's going to look further and say, oh, maybe it isn't. So the gold standard of care is if there are antibodies to gluten, then you have celiac disease and all gluten needs to be completely eliminated. It's not always digestive issues that look like celiac disease. Celiac disease is also not common, isn't very common in kids, to be honest, but what is common in kids is a sensitivity to gluten and the inflammation associated with a leaky gut that is caused by consumption of a large amount of this kind of grain. Okay, so what other questions do you have? I'm gonna take questions now. About anything, could be about this or anything about the program.
So, ma'am, I've been following this program. It's almost like 4 weeks. So I'm doing each program very slowly because I want to see the improvement, and I'm not going and rushing through each week by week. So I'm still at the first stage and half at the second stage of introducing some kind of juice, juicing and stuff. I'm not rushing with juicing to all kind of vegetables. I'm like taking one at a time. I do see the difference, but still like he's completely all right, and suddenly one fine day it's like flaring up, and I'm not knowing like for what is the flaring up, because I cut down sugar, dairy, gluten. So like his skin was like, I'm like, oh, I do see hope, like, you know, wow, after so many days, and suddenly all of it again, whole body, I'm like, oh god, it's again from the scratch. I do not know, it's like so frustrating.
So in general, it's still better, right? We spoke like 2 weeks ago.
Yes.
It was, I think you said 2 weeks steps forward, 1 step back. Is there improvement in the past few weeks?
Yes, there's a lot of improvement, but like I have 2 kids, so I do see improvement in my son, but I don't see improvement in my daughter. Is it because of the heat, because she's not getting like eczema, but she's getting all that small things around her hand. So I do not know whether it's eczema or it's the summer heat.
Has it happened before, like last summer?
No, it never happened. It just happened this year.
Do you ever put anything on it? Like,
So earlier she used to get eczema around her corners, on her elbows, and behind her legs. So I used to keep that steroid mometasone something, that one. But now it's spreading like anything. I see, like, my son is severe eczema and my daughter has mild eczema. But now I see more in my daughter and my son is healing. So I'm like, oh, now it's like opposite.
have you tried to apply a steroid cream to it?
Yeah, if I keep steroid cream, it goes.
Did it help?
Yes.
Okay, so I don't know what it is. It's like kind of impossible for me to. There could be a lot of different things, and heat could be one of them. Just heat rash. What I do notice a lot is in the summertime when it's really hot, a lot of kids have yeast overgrowth, or fungal overgrowth. And so this is why you see like a lot of kids, I think you've probably seen like in the Eczema Rescue Club, if you're following those posts, you'll see a lot of parents posting photos of their kids' white spots. And it's only in the summertime because the sun hits the areas, and
Yes.
those fungal areas, which tend to grow with heat, and yeasts tend to grow with heat, don't tan. So anyway, it could be a lot of different things. I wish I could be able to diagnose her, but I can't.
Can I, ma'am, can I send the pictures of my daughter like in clothes and some, like, is it possible, or like I should go to my pediatrician?
Go to your pediatrician, because I'm not able to really be your pediatrician like this.
Sure.
But in general, I could give you information on approaches that work well when it comes to kids who are very sensitive to heat. So one option is to make sure that they're very cool down at night. So it makes a big difference, but making sure that like the sheets that your child is sleeping on are allowing air circulation. So even though like very high thread count cotton is wonderful and very soft, it's actually too tight, and kids could get really hot and sweaty and could make it even worse. So like that's one thing to try to do if you're suspecting it to be a heat problem. Something else you could consider doing is using apple cider vinegar baths more, because that really does help neutralize some of those yeasts and fungal overgrowths, which can trigger eczema in a lot of kids. You have a change in the microbiome of the skin. So that's one thing. There's actually, I haven't tried it, but like I know it exists, and I think it's too overpriced. But for kids who are really sensitive to heat, there's something called a coolie pad, which is basically like a pad that plugs in, and it's a chili pad, and you sleep on this like cooling mattress topper, just if things get bad. So have you tried apple cider vinegar yet?
I tried the baking soda detoxing, but I did not try the apple cider. I'll try to.
Yeah. So, and that might help. Do it a few times, throw it in a bath, or take it and spray it on diluted, and then wait like 3 to 10 minutes and then wash it off. Always wash off all the additives that you put in a bath. Okay.
Sure.
This is Louise. Can I just say something?
Mm-hmm.
My daughter sounds very similar. We got a heat wave here in UK, which is unusual. And she's had these spots that have come over her body as well. And I think it's putting the cream, and I think it might be partly sweat, like the pores. So this bit like this and she's also had heat rash, but also she's had in the past, I'm not very good at pronouncing it. Is it melonium? It's like that virus. Is it called melonium or something? Begin with M.
Molluscum.
Okay,
yeah. So
and I got told that it's common when they've got eczema. So they're like little spots, and they start around the eczema site, and then they spread a bit over different places of the body. And that's what's happened to her. And I didn't know what it was, but I spoke to the doctor about it. She hadn't seen it, but she said that could be it. So I don't know if yours is maybe the same, but anyway, I just thought I'd let you know that.
So thank you. I do recommend getting diagnosed by a reliable like practitioner. You doesn't have to be a holistic one to get a diagnosis, because so many skin conditions look very similar. It's not always eczema, Yeah. Okay. Oh, okay. Let's see. Paige asked a question. What do you think of gluten-free oats? So oats are naturally gluten-free, Paige. They don't naturally have gluten in them. You are paying premium price for them because they're usually processed in the same facility as other grains that might have gluten in them. So if they're like so much more expensive. It's not necessary unless your child has celiac disease to get gluten-free oats if you're trying to not spend extra money. Because again, oats don't naturally have gluten in them. It's like not worth the extra cost, in my opinion. Margaret asked, my son wants to swim, but I have noticed the chlorine dries and flares the skin. Do you have any suggestions to combat as he loves to swim? Margaret, is that the chlorine that he's swimming in?
Yeah, we have a chlorine-filled pool.
Okay.
And even though, so this time of year, I know the heat kind of exacerbates his skin, but I feel like consistently it's the chlorine, because we even went to a beach and it was pretty hot. And actually his skin improved when we went to the beach because I imagine it was salt water. But so I'm assuming the chlorine is really drying him out.
Yeah, I have the best solution. So two, well, no. Okay, two solutions, one solution and one thought. You want to so it's interesting because bleach baths are used as a remedy for a lot of kids who have eczema. I have never recommended it to anyone. I think it's very aggressive. It makes no sense to me. And the reason why bleach baths are recommended by conventional practitioners for eczema is because you're basically trying to kill off everything on the body, like all the microbes, good, bad, it doesn't matter, just kill everything with chlorine, right? So that might be beneficial for a lot of kids because sometimes eczema, which it is triggered by a bacterial overgrowth. So you'll sometimes see kids who have eczema and then they'll get like staph infections. They're more prone to that, for example. Okay, so that's like one approach. So some kids who go swimming in chlorine, Margaret, they actually get better. And others are so irritated by the chlorine because it's so harsh and it disturbs further the skin barrier, right? Because we know eczema is a genetic issue. It's an immune dysregulation. It's too much inflammation and too much of an immune response to whatever, right? It's also a skin barrier issue. So the skin barrier issue is why we're having so much sensitivity is in kids who have eczema. Already why is it dry? Because the skin barrier is disturbed and so the moisture can't be maintained. So those are the kids that you can't put chemicals on their skin. It's gonna get bad. Chlorine is a big time chemical. I don't recommend using it to heal anything. But you need to, so swimming is great, happiness is good, sunshine is wonderful. What you can do is actually neutralize after swimming by putting baking soda in a bathtub and having them soak in baking soda. It's extremely effective.
Okay.
And on the side note, the thought that I had was if you have a child who is like fine, but as soon as you give them a bath, they just itch and flare. And think about the water supply in your home. If it's public water, there might be a tremendous amount of chlorine in it. And so you could actually use a Berkey used to make a really good attachment for the shower. It was like $90. It lasts forever. It literally takes out all the chlorine and other chemicals out of that bath shower hand. It's a shower handle attachment. There are other brands that I can't like vouch for, and Berkey is basically like it's out of stock right now. But just consider getting a really good filter if your child is bathing and they're sensitive to chlorine or you're suspecting that.
How much? Oh, sorry. How much baking soda, like ratio? Like
oh yeah. Gosh. I have a guide for you. Okay. There's all the ratios there. Keep in mind like what size bath you're using. So for those of you listening who have a baby bathtub versus a regular size bathtub, it's different. I would say like a cup would be fine, but take a look at the guide under detox baths. That's in there too. Sorry, I haven't done that in a while. We have been swimming in a lake.
So what is the shower thing that you mentioned?
It's
Can you
called,
put in?
yeah, I'll put it
Oh,
in
let
the
me.
chat.
Yeah,
So
I think.
it's called Berkey. Berkey is like a water filter company, and they
Oh,
make,
okay. I think you have to.
but
Okay. I think.
it's like I can't find it for the past few months. People are having trouble finding it. So just, and I haven't used other companies, so I can't recommend them,
Okay.
but I'm sure the technology, it's not that complex. It exists for other companies too.
Okay.
It's basically just you just really need a shower filter that removes chlorine and fluoride.
Okay.
Chlorine, maybe fluoride would be nice too. Chemicals. The environmental working group actually has a database to check what kind of water you have in your home based on zip code, if you have public water. If you're curious, it's called the water guide. And if you're like curious to see what's in your water and it's scary, check it out. Because
Okay.
it can help guide your decision on how high quality of a filter you want to be using.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. All right. What other questions do you have? What do you want to talk about?
Sorry, this is Louise. I can't find it. I did the challenge, but I couldn't find the information, like what you're saying about the broths and the baths and things, because I think when you do the challenge, it's recorded, and then you say you'll send it.
Yeah, it's not in the challenge, it's in the program. I'll email to you the link again, okay?
Okay.
After we get off the call, I have your email. It's not in the 5-day challenge, it's in the program, the Eczema Rescue program. I'll send it over to you. Just in case it's lost in the shuffle. Yeah.
Hi, I should have been more specific in my question about the gluten-free oats. I'm wondering, like, with the glyphosate connection, are we worried about that in oats, even if they're, like, I've heard organic oats still would have glyphosate. Can you talk about that?
Sure. Is this Paige?
Yeah.
Okay. Hi, Paige.
Hi.
Hold on. Let me just read the pen. Okay. Can you repeat your question one more time?
Yes. So for gluten-free oats or just organic oats, are we worried about glyphosate contamination in those?
No, not real. No. So there's a little bit of glyphosate everywhere, but if you want to take out most of it, that it's wheat, which is gluten, right? You want to remove GMO corn and GMO soy. Those are like the top 3. Soy, corn, wheat. So if you're worried about glyphosate contamination, like minimize, you can't possibly remove all of it. But there's a substantially larger amount in wheat, in GMO corn and GMO soy. Most corn and soy I would try to avoid unless it's like some really high quality local like corn that is not grown with lots of glyphosates and chemicals.
So Doc, for the soy, I mean, it's kind of controversial. So I want to take your understand the GMO one, right?
Yeah.
But if you're getting organic, is that okay? Because I mean, they're all kind of studies. So it's like, what's your take? Dairy and wheat, I got your, like, take it off. That's start.
Okay.
So even in start, you recommend taking the soy as well if you can get organic, like tofu or something, or no?
Organic soy.
Like organic tofu or soy.
Oh, yeah. So it's what I mentioned, I think.
Yeah.
For asking me to clarify. What I said was GMO soy. So organic is non-GMO.
Yep. So organic is fine, right?
Organic is fine. However,
and go ahead.
Point out separately, okay, that I would not say that a diet very, very heavy with soy products is a good idea for kids because of the estrogens.
So once in a while, once in a while, because the thing is for us,
okay, but daily, and
not daily, and I would tell you why, right? Because challenge with our kids is that chickpeas nuts, eggs out of the window. They get flare-ups, right? So I think the variety of protein
Oh yeah.
and more nutritionally dense foods is getting less when taking the milk and the wheat, right? Then you're just left with some varieties of beans, and oats, and different grains, right?
Yeah.
But so yeah, because in traditional Indian we do a lot of stuff with chickpeas. We can do it, but we can't give them, right?
Yeah.
So I think so here and there, but I also fear that if you feel that it's better for first 2 months, don't worry about that nutritionally dense. If it's monotonous, somehow you can get past that hump of making them feeling better, even though if on some scales the calorie intake is a little less, that's fine, because the goal is to make them feel better, and then you conclude. Like, I think do you see what my question now is?
Yeah. So this many people who have kids with allergies have this problem, and it's actually really difficult as like to create a general course and say like, because you can't limit everything. And I can sit here and I can write a whole thing about salicylates are bad, histamines are bad, everything is bad, right? Everything could be potentially bad. Plus you have a child who's already restricted. So I'm going to kind of say what is an absolute definitely remove.
Got it.
And then
Got it.
fine, the other stuff is fine. So what you absolutely need to remove is consider on the like hierarchy of things that are very unhealthy for a kid that you're trying to heal from eczema. Dairy for some time until things heal a little bit, and then make sure that you bring back healthy dairy. Gluten, sugar. That's like basically those three. If you do soy, that's fine. Make sure it's organic. If you do corn, that's fine. Make sure it's organic. You're not harming them. If you
definitely, because that's for sure. Now, like when we introduce, okay, thank you, that helps.
Okay, it's
and especially listening from a doctor, right? It's just like if I'm reading online, it doesn't give that kind of satisfaction. So if hearing from someone who's an expert, right, it just gives a different kind of
So the truth is, moms and dads listening is like, there's salicylates or histamines. Not every child is going to react to it. Every kid is different. But we know for sure that conventional dairy is inflammatory. We know for sure that modern conventional wheat and gluten is inflammatory. That I can say for sure. And for kids who are healthy, they don't have eczema, they're fine. Hopefully all of your kids soon. You can have all the things in moderation and not have any reactions or problems. So this is like a very comprehensive healing approach to not a lifestyle forever. Okay.
Yeah. I just wrote that down, that it's like hard for some time, but then once you get over that, right, it's
Hello.
Hi. Hello.
Hello.
Hi, who is this?
Paola.
Hi, how are you?
Oh, there's. So I have a question. So once we're past gut healing, and I know since our diet is very limited, and she tested positive for a couple of things, allergies, and how do we start addressing food allergies? Like once we're past gut healing.
Okay, so allergies take longer, but it's kind of in the same realm. So one approach is to consider making sure that, it depends on the allergies, first of all. Like, are we speaking about anaphylactic allergies or
no? All of them were grade 1, from 1 to 6.
Okay. Did your doctor say avoid it?
No, they didn't say to avoid it, but I just avoid all of them, and following the program, obviously, and avoiding them, and so she is much better, much better. I think the itching went down by 60% and her she's overall better. But yeah, they didn't say to avoid it. I just decided to take them out of her diet.
Okay, great. So if she's much better, so now you could start reintroducing things. And the way that I would do it is, do you remember when she was like a baby and you were introducing things slowly, one by one? So what you want to probably do is give her the food in a small natural amount. So tell me something that you wanted to reintroduce, like a.
So for me, it's I feel like the ones that I would like to bring back will be like egg and almond, because
Okay.
a lot of like the gluten-free products have almond in them, and I think it'll be super helpful for us, both egg and almond.
Okay, so again, and for, I know not the case in your case, but for anyone listening, I do not recommend giving a child anything that their doctor said not to give, like specifically, especially if it's an anaphylactic allergy. So I would say, let's say it's almond, right? You want to introduce it in the most natural form and in a small amount. So it would just be like a regular almond, one almond, right? It wouldn't be almond that is inside a cookie cracker, something processed, okay? You want it to be like the most natural state. Give a small amount. Wait a day, maybe have a journal, look for symptoms, not just scratching, itching, but look at how your child is pooping, their demeanor, are they bloated? That's a really big sign too, because sensitivities and allergies don't just look like itchiness and eczema and runny nose and runny eyes and hives. It could look like digestive issues. It could look like disturbed sleep. It could look a lot of different things. So maybe keep a journal. So introduce it on monitor for a day, introduce it on day 2, introduce it on day 3 in small amounts. And do that for like, I don't know, there's no exact number, but I would say probably like 5 days, little by little, because you're accumulating it slowly, and look for a reaction. And I think you're okay after a week, you know, if you're not seeing any problems. By a week, you'll see something wrong if there was something wrong. If you're doing egg, very often allergists will do a baked egg challenge. And because the baked egg is a lot less allergenic than like lightly fried egg, or you know, so consider baking a little bit of an egg. And then kind of off the record, something that I like to do with kids to test for sensitivities, and this is definitely not a clear-cut science, is to actually take a little bit of the food that you want to introduce, rub it on the inner wrist before bed. I mean, almond you can't really do, but if it's like baked egg or something, put it on the skin directly, and then have the child sleep and wake up in the morning. And if there's redness, I wouldn't push it. Maybe do other things, let the gut heal more. Time, yeah.
Sounds good. Thank you.
You're welcome. Glad to hear things are better. Good. Who else would like to share, ask questions, talk? Anyone else?
I had a quick question.
Yes.
So, you know, with eczema, I know a lot of the kind of the things that come with the territory are the asthma, the reactive airway disease, food allergies, which my son has. One thing that he's had trouble with is just a ridiculous reaction to environmental allergens. And it seems to be every shrub and tree known to mankind. And we're in the South, we're in Texas, which is one of the worst allergen states. And no matter what, you know, and I know conventional allergists are going to say kind of the same things, but, you know, their solution was to do allergy shots in hopes that he would, you know, overcome his seasonal allergies. And unfortunately, it backfired tremendously. I mean, it worsened his eczema to a level I've never seen before. So we decided to discontinue. But, you know, yeah, and it's not realistic. We can't live in a bubble. And I do use HEPA filters at home, but I know that's not the underlying mechanism as to why he's having these reactions, but it's so hard to heal his skin when the outside is always there. And, you know, and so from a food perspective, we've done really well. And that's what I can control, but I can't control the environmental. And I'm just thinking, like, how do I get his skin to calm down when he has to go outside, you know, and you know, he has to endure whatever is outside. And so I didn't know what your thoughts were on that.
Yeah. So a few thoughts, some of which are like pretty simple, to try to decompress the system. I don't know, you probably have done many of these things, if not all of them already. And if not, just a kind of a gentle reminder to consider like minimizing exposures by putting a really high quality air filter in the bedroom.
Yes.
You
Yes.
probably do that, right?
We
When
have the air doctor.
yeah, oh, that's my favorite. That's a great one.
Yeah.
Okay, so that then having him wash his change before when he comes home, because a lot of the environmental like pollens and grasses, they're on clothes, that might help. You can try to use some supplements that might be beneficial to calming some of that inflammation. And so it's not going to work like Zyrtec, Claritin, all those symptom managers that work really well that everyone is on, but things like something with quercetin that helps support the body's like processes for calming some of these allergenic triggers. Bromelain will help. Quercetin, nettle leaf, or even like nettle tea helps. So, or an herbal approach to help support the body rid itself of all those. But really, it's going to be gut healing, to be honest.
Yeah.
Because if it's in the why is it that why environmental allergies? Like, why does everyone have allergies? Why is it that when I meet a new patient and I ask the family, like, what medicine is your child on? They will never remember to say Zyrtec, Claritin, Flonase, all of those over-the-counter allergy meds. It's because it's so common. Everyone thinks this is a normal thing. It's not. It's a symptom of a bigger problem. That bigger problem is he's in the environment and he's swallowing all the things in the environment, and that's going through his gut lining into the bloodstream. That's, I'm really sure that most of it is leaky gut.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So I would like do a really aggressive gut healing approach, which is
And you know, with him, you know, I give him the quercetin, bromelain. I think we have stinging nettle. It's like a product called D-Hish Junior.
Yeah, you have to use it like every day for 30, 60 days. It's not gonna relieve symptoms overnight.
No, I think we've been doing it for actually more than a year now. I mean, you know, and it's, you know, and the allergists are always just saying, well, it's, you know, it's the outside that's triggering it. But, you know, and as much as we try to control food for him, you know, and we've done gluten-free, we've done dairy-free, we've done, I think those were the two things. And kind of to go back to my question about celiac, because with him, he was so reactive on testing to so many allergens, and that he had antibodies to gliadin, but he did not have antibodies to transglutaminase. So the other.
Oh, okay.
So it was just gliadin in isolation. And so we saw a pediatric GI, and they just said, you know what, he's just so inflamed that they thought it was an inappropriate kind of response. And we've tried gluten with him just to see what happens, and nothing, no changes in skin, nothing. And we've repeated this time and time again. And so I didn't know if you've seen that as a common on testing. I don't know.
I haven't, but it's not common that we test kids for this. Oh, I don't actually, because it's more like in the realm of allergists and gastroenterologists, and it's not even, it doesn't, just because I didn't see it doesn't mean it doesn't.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. So he's allowed to have gluten, is that what you're saying?
Well, we do it, we avoid it anyways, but unfortunately, you know, when he goes to birthday parties.
Oh yeah, once in a while, like it's not gonna, he doesn't have celiac. Okay, that's good.
Yeah, nothing happens, so.
You probably would know, like kids with celiac disease have symptoms from exposure.
And I think Doc covers it in many, but I think in 1 minute, like, we all have something that can help each other. Also look for what you're applying, because I notice, and I have had eczema for a long time. And now lately I'm figuring, after many decades, as we find out more, I was avoiding a lot of foods, but they were not the culprit. The good moisturizers like Aveeno, like these best ones, they cause me flare up. And I was applying them thinking that the food was causing them, eliminating them. And I was, so I think that maybe just keep that in mind, because my allergies were really bad, but since I stopped applying them, my inflammation went down. I'm able to eat more, and my allergies are also not that bad. It was like a worse cycle that they were creating for me. But I was like, what am I doing? Because generally some doctor or anyone would say, oh, you apply whatever, right? These CeraVes and Cetaphil, right? And they were causing it for me. I mean, my flare up is so bad that even if my son has applied it and I touch him after 3 hours, I'll get a flare up. And it's hard for kids because they can't tell you. So that's a challenge, right? Even if they're having with something that you're applying. So I think just wanted to share that, like, for anyone, right? Like, be very careful, even with these great ones, just keep an eye, because sometimes it's not the food, it's that.
Well said, thank you. Yeah, I mean, the things that are marketed for kids is ridiculous, like Johnson baby lotion. It's the worst. Why do babies need lotion in the first place is beyond me. So from the beginning, like, it's just the whole system is set up for failure, unfortunately.
Yeah, I remember you saying that if you can't eat it, don't apply it. I mean, that was really good.
Mostly.
That was really, yeah, mostly. I mean, yeah, mostly. And they kind of sound, because skin is such a big organ, like it's going in your bloodstream.
I have the exceptions to that are minimal in my case. Like, what I recommend is sometimes I recommend using Glad Skin, because it's like a probiotic. It works really well.
You're right.
But mostly, if you can't eat it, don't use it. And tallow works really well.
I have a question. Like, one of my friends, she was saying like vaccinations also lead to eczema. Is it true? So because now that there's so many vaccinations, back when I was a child, there were not so many vaccinations, but not only with COVID, but we have so many other vaccinations. Once the child turns, the pediatrician prefers, okay, he has to take, I don't know what vaccination they're taking. So does this flare up eczema, or, do we really need vaccinations, like, apart from the basic ones?
So
I know it's a difficult one.
We need vaccinations, but every child is different. Okay. Some kids have inflammation from vaccinations and others don't. And in the US, we have a system where it's recommended for everyone to get the same vaccinations at the same time, no matter what, whether your child is sick, has eczema, has other chronic problems, is having a fever, had reactions in the past, it doesn't matter. But human beings are all different. So to say like vaccines are good or bad is impossible, because they do serve a very important purpose. But there are also side effects. So if you're asking if there's a known link between eczema and vaccines, you're not going to find it. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Okay, like, you're not going to find the literature, and I have to practice evidence-based medicine. So I can't be like, yeah, because I can't find the literature. That doesn't mean the literature is not there. Just can't find it. It's not available to me or anyone else. So that's why I'm frustrated when I don't know how to answer that question. What I can say is that when you optimize, common sense, right? Like, if your child is already sick and having fever, illness, a flare, something, is it the best time to give more inflammation? I don't know, something to consider, right? Does it have to be that exact day? Because A lot of the problems I see as a holistic pediatrician, and I have a holistic pediatric practice, and my patients come to me with vaccine injury all the time. It's almost impossible to get exempt unless there's a life-threatening, like not even anaphylactic. Like you have to get the vaccine and within 12 hours be hospitalized with a life-threatening reaction, and otherwise it doesn't count. So if there's a reaction a day later, if there's a reaction a week later, it doesn't matter what the reaction is. It doesn't matter if the child is having seizures 24/7 after that vaccine. If the criteria is not strictly met, saying like, this is, I didn't even leave the office and my child is having all these reactions and they're life-threatening, it's not considered vaccine injury. So the data is not there. Okay, so I have nothing to go by to answer that question. But I can tell you that if you're working on optimizing gut health, that is the place in the body where a person is able to detox best. So if that's where all the garbage comes out of the body, so you're not having this too much inflammation after a vaccine. Okay, I hope that helps. Yeah, no answer. Okay, other questions?
Hi, I wanted to ask about sourdough bread. Is that allowed, or is that because
Oh yeah, sorry, I saw your question, didn't get to it yet. Sourdough bread is still wheat. It's cultured, so it's like a better version. It's more digestible. It's probably, if you're doing wheat, it's probably the best way to do it because it's easier to digest, but it's still the same wheat.
Oh, it's still wheat. Okay.
Yeah. So it's just the way it's prepared, which is, it's basically fermented, although I can't say it has any live microbes, but it is easier to digest. So it's still wheat, it's still the same wheat. It really doesn't matter what you're putting in it, but it can be, in moderation, if you're getting if you're using high quality wheat to make it, that's great. It's delicious.
Yeah, I've been seeing like that you can make it yourself, and I'm like, oh, I would like to try that.
Yeah, that was like my whole pandemic was sourdough bread.
Oh yeah, oh nice.
So yeah, so it's still wheat, and if you're gonna do high wheat bread sometimes and wheat sometimes, then get a really good high quality sourdough.
Awesome. Okay.
Sometimes, not during
Yeah.
eczema healing.
No, yeah. I mean, my daughter is about to stop breastfeeding, but I still want to continue doing like the healthy stuff for me, the majority of it.
Yeah.
I mean, not everything, but I want my sweets. But I was thinking like to eliminate gluten because I see the difference.
Oh,
but
you
I was
do?
like,
Yeah.
I miss bread, so I was wondering about sourdough.
Yeah.
Oh, good to know.
Yeah. Oh, and
Thank
Taylor
you.
asked, you're welcome. Taylor asked a question in the chat. I'll just read it. I was wondering if there's anything to do to prevent eczema in pregnancy. We eat nearly completely organic and use all free and clear products and have reduced many of the toxins in our home and continue to, as well as find safer products. And our son still has eczema. It's been so hard, and I'm nervous about having a second child because his eczema has been so hard to deal with. Great question, Taylor. So I would say that the best thing you can do is optimize your own gut health, because our kids' gut health is almost completely determined by ours, especially in the beginning. So when a baby is born vaginally, when they pass through the vaginal canal, they are taking a big gulp of vaginal flora, which is basically the same microbiome content and constitution as gastrointestinal flora. And that's what we want them to do, because we want those kinds of microbes to seed in the gut. The gut of babies is almost completely, it's not sterile, but it's almost completely sterile. So if you have a baby who takes a big gulp of a microbiome that's not necessarily very diverse or very healthy, that's what's going to populate in them unless you make some changes. Breastfeeding is extremely, 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 extremely beneficial to preventing eczema in kids who are predisposed to it. Making sure that you have a wide variety of different kinds of foods that are highly allergenic also is helpful. And making sure your own microbiome is healthy, very healthy. So stocks, broths, ferment, big time. avoiding a lot of over-the-counter medications, basically the same thing as this program. And maybe even considering speaking to your doctor about like a high quality probiotic as well before delivery. And if, because if a baby is born, and this is so easy to test, by the way, it takes 10 minutes to test the microbiome of a human now. We have all this technology, it's so simple. So when you have babies who are born vaginally, they take samples of their stool, they look at the microbiome constitution, it's this lactobacillus and all the good bacteria overriding the bad. But when you have a child that was born by a C-section, for example, and they didn't take that big gulp, you'll have a lot of strep and staph in their gut lining and in their gut, and so that's usually skin flora, and so that could throw some things off in early childhood. So I don't specialize in exactly that, but if I could go back in time, I would definitely really optimize my own gut health. They don't talk about that in OBGYN's offices to me. Timo asked, do you recommend GI tests? I don't recommend direct to consumer tests because for two reasons. One is you might get a lot of information that you can't necessarily use properly. And for a growing child that might be already very limited, you might be eliminating things that are not helpful. Like there's, I did this little experiment myself because I was curious, and they sent me like a free one. And so I did one of those like direct to consumer, where you could like go and you could find out your own gut health and microbiome constituency from this company like Biome, and then there's Biome, and they're all the same basically. And I did it with one of the companies, and then and they gave me things like I should be eating and I shouldn't be eating based on my microbiome. And then they changed those instructions like once a week, every week, till it looked like nothing before. So although you might have a lot of data, the problem with functional medicine tests, especially if they're used by like practitioner or a person, like if someone's interpreting it for you and they're giving you these recommendations, you might end up taking things out that might not necessarily be helpful. So it's just the science is there, the information is there, but the interpretation of the data is not there yet technologically. So that's why I don't recommend doing it. Sometimes when I see kids and families one-on-one in my practice in New York and New Jersey, I would say like 85% of the time, I do exactly this program that we're doing here for about a month or two, because so much changes in that first month or two in gut health that there's really no point in testing until you do this kind of protocol. And if you're still not happy with the results, then you might want to consider finding like a functional doctor or maybe a naturopath to work with specifically to optimize your child's gut health using tests possibly. But that's really usually not the first step unless someone's already done all those steps that we're doing here.
Thank you. And how long would you say that most kids that you see, like I know everybody's so different, but like what's like an average that you see that most kids heal in?
Oh, okay. The big question, when will my child get better? Okay, so I would say that if you really like do this program on this specific program, there is some improvement in 30 days. Okay, so that's step one. Step two is like then you'll see different kinds of improvements over time. You might have less flares, they might not be as severe. Do they not last as long when there are flares? Is the itching not as bad? Or is your child able to tolerate things that they might not have in the past? So that gets better like over a year. And if you continue to do a gut healing protocol, I would say that there is significant improvement in about a year.
Okay, yeah, because my daughter was doing great. Like I think I started the program end of February, and by May she was doing so much better.
Mm-hmm.
And then she got sick in May.
Yeah.
And it flared up, but then it kind of got better, and then she got sick again at the end of June. And since then she's been pretty bad. Like I feel like we just took a bunch of steps back. Like she flared up all over her back, which I had never seen that even from before the program. then that's getting better. But now her ankles are super itchy and irritated, and like it's just been so hard because I was like, wow, like we were almost there, and it's been like super stressful because I'm like, oh my God, what am I doing wrong? Like, how do we go back? You know, like I feel like we were progressing. I think I told you by May, we were already like 70%, I would say, better. And then now I feel like, I don't know, she's itchy. Like I feel kind of like we're at the beginning, maybe a little bit of progress from the beginning, but it just feels like, I'm like, wow, like what just happened?
Okay, so sorry to hear that. Illness is a big trigger for inflammation, right? So it's overload. So go back, at least you know now what to do, right? You know what worked. It's gonna work again.
Okay.
Um,
Is sickness like a big setback, like months, or it all, I mean, I guess it all depends, right?
can you repeat that, please?
Like being sick, like is it always like a huge setback, or is it
No,
like
no, it's just a common trigger for a lot of kids. It's like, I'm not surprised to hear that. I'm sorry to hear that, but I'm not surprised. You know, if it worked before, it's going to work again.
okay, that's good to know. Yeah, that's what keeps me going, that I'm like, okay, you know, it has to work. But let's say like she's already like healed. Let's say we're already at like 100% in the future and she gets sick. Is that something that could just continue like bringing it back? Or how does that work?
Can, hopefully
Okay.
not as bad. So then, right, so like, hopefully if she does, that's kind of seems to be her trend, right? How her body reacts. So the hope is that if she gets sick again and, you know, it's not going to be so severe, it might be a flare, but it won't be so bad.
Okay.
Maybe also consider like adding immune support to her system, like making sure her vitamin D levels are nice and high. That's helpful, like making sure that she's able to fight infection without a lot of inflammation easily. Vitamin D, vitamin C, zinc, echinacea.
Okay. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Anyone else have any questions? I think I answered them all in the chat. Yeah. What other questions do you have?
Okay, so last time.
Yeah.
So I have eczema too. That's why my daughter got it, but I have it very mild. It's like only in my wrist. But I hadn't gotten it in years. Like I never knew about this. It didn't really bother me because I thought it was more, I was a bartender back then. So it was like mixing the drinks and like it will mostly happen then. At that time, I was very stressed out because I had just started teaching and I was bartending on the weekend. So it was just like a lot. And that's like the worst I had seen my eczema. And then with time, it just like went away. And like once in a blue or like flare up, but really tiny. And I would just put like an oil and that's it. But now to me, it's so weird that now I have it again and it's pretty bad in that area. Kind of like when I was bartending like 8 years ago. And I'm kind of confused because I'm like, okay, if I'm doing all this gut healing, like, why is that flaring up on me? So I'm like, does it necessarily always the gut, or can it be like another, like maybe stress related that I flare up?
Especially for adults, stress is a huge trigger.
Okay.
So it's a little less for kids. It can be a trigger, especially older kids. I can't. But for adults, stress is a definite trigger for sure. Yeah, absolutely, 100%. I don't know. I don't have much I don't have any experience in adult eczema. I'm a pediatrician and I just could only assume, but so I don't want to even like say, but I know that stress is absolutely a trigger. Yeah. And so I'm a big fan of meditating.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I need to get
I recommend like 10 minutes a day makes a really big difference in inflammation in the body. And there are so many studies about that. There's a section, by the way, in the digital guide about mindfulness tools that you might want to check out for yourself as well.
Awesome. Thank you.
So it's like such a simple thing. It takes 10 minutes. For older kids too, if anyone's listening that has like a teenagers, adolescents, kids, it's worth spending those 10 minutes a day just to feeling into the body and calming the system down a little, especially in so much coming at our kids' screens and things and activities and input, you know. Yeah. Okay, any other questions? Okay, last call. Okay, so next time we meet will be, it's like 2 weeks from now. And if you have any questions in between, please post them inside the closed Eczema Rescue Program group. So the answers that I'll answer will be serving everyone, because a lot of people have the same questions. And next month is fun. Next, all of August, we'll speak about histamine, which is a huge topic. We'll talk about easy gut healing and what that means as well, like the biggest things that make the biggest impact. So if anyone has any other questions, I am sweltering in this room and I didn't want to have the AC on most of this. So if anyone has any other questions, I'm gonna go put on my AC. Thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in. I really appreciate all of you being here. Yeah.
I have one question,
Yeah.
because you just now was talking about
Sure.
AC.
Yeah, I'll stay on, and if anyone needs to sign off, please do. If you need to go.
Yes.
Feel free.
Regarding the AC, I just wanted to ask, and you reminded. So in a day, like I remember in the course you have mentioned about the AC and in winter. So in summers, when I was saying my husband the same thing, like we need to switch off our AC because we need to breathe in the fresh air. But he tells our bill will be high because the entire system will be like hot. And again, to make the system cool, the AC unit has to work a lot. So that's how a bill comes. So I would like to know more about it, because I like to be more in fresh air.
Yeah, fresh air is good, but you don't want to break your AC. So
Yeah.
it's fine. Just make sure you change your filters, and make sure there's no mold like accumulating under it and dripping into it. You'd be surprised like how much mold can grow in an old AC duct.
So is it advisable to switch off the AC? Like in the program, it mentions
to
1
open
hour.
the windows. You
Yeah.
know, when I mentioned that, what I actually meant more was in the winter time. What I was speaking about is in the winter time, it would be nice. It would be really nice because there's like usually heat and forced air, and that's stagnant air. I didn't mention it in the summertime, but in the winter time, it's nice to have the window cracked open, even in the winter time.
Sure.
I also find that like kids spend a lot of more time outside in the summer, so they get a lot more fresh air, and it's not as much of a issue.
Sure. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Yes. Any other questions? Okay. All right. Thank you so much, everybody. It was such a pleasure. I love connecting with you all, and thank you for being here. Have a beautiful week. Bye.